Hello everyone, we're here at the Caribou Public Library going to continue reading Mary Poppins by P.L. Travers and illustrated by Mary Shepard. We're here at the Caribou Public Library and I am Miss Erin. So I'm so glad that you're here with us today. We're continuing on chapter 10. This is the last section. It's called Full Moon. And Mary Poppins had just received her birthday gift from the snake, from the Hamadryad, which was one of his skins. And she was just thanking him so much. "I just can't thank you enough," she began. "Don't try," said the Hamadryad. "Hiss," he went on, and spread out his hood, as though he were listening with it. "Do I not hear the signal for the grand chain?" Everybody listened. A bell was ringing, and a deep, gruff voice could be heard coming nearer and nearer, crying out, grand chain, everybody to the center of for the grand chain and finale. Come along, stand ready for the grand chain." "I thought so," said the Hamadryad, smiling. "You must be off, my dear. They'll be waiting for you to take your place in the center. Farewell until your next birthday." And he raised himself as he had done before and lightly saluted Mary Poppins on both cheeks. "Hurry away," said the Hamadryad. "I will take care of your young friends." Jane and Michael felt the brown bear moving under them, and they stood up. Past their feet they could feel all the snakes slipping and writhing as they hurried from the snake house. Mary Poppins bowed toward the Hamadryad very ceremoniously, and without a backward glance at the children, went running towards the huge green square at the center of the zoo. "You may leave us," said the Hamadryad to the brown bear, who, after bowing humbly, ran off with his cap in his hand to where all the other animals were congregating around Mary Poppins. "Will you go with me?" said the Hamadryad kindly to Jane and Michael. And without waiting for them to reply, he slid between them and with the movement of his hood directed them to walk one on either side of him. "It has begun," he said, hissing with pleasure. And from the loud cries that were now coming from the green, the children could guess that he meant the grand chain. As they drew nearer, they could hear the animals singing and shouting, and presently they saw leopards and lions, beavers, camels, bears, cranes, antelopes, and many others all forming themselves into a ring around Mary Poppins. Then the animals began to move, wildly crying their jungle songs, prancing in and out of the ring, and exchanging hands and wing as they went, as dancers do in the grand chain of the Lancers. A little piping voice rose high above the rest. "Oh, Mary, Mary, she's my dearie-o." And they saw the penguin come dancing by, waving his short wings and singing lustily. He caught sight of them, bowed to the Hamadryad, and called out, "I got it! Did you hear me singing it? It's not perfect, of course. Dearie does not rhyme exactly with Mary, but it'll do. And he skipped off and offered his wing to a leopard. Here are all the animals forming their ring around Mary Poppins. Here is Mary. Jane and Michael watched the dance, the Hamadryad secret and still between them. As their friend the lion, dancing past, bent down to take the wing of a Brazilian pheasant in his paw, Jane shyly tried to put her feelings into words. "I thought, sir," she began, and stopped, feeling confused and not sure whether she should say it or not. "Speak up, my child," said the Hamadryad. "You thought?" "Well, that lions and birds and tigers and little animals—" The Hamadryad helped her. "You thought that they were natural enemies, that the lion could not meet a bird without eating it, nor the tiger the hare, eh?" Jane blushed and nodded. "Ah, you may be right. It is possible, but not on the birthday," said the Hamadryad. "Tonight, the small are free from the great, and the great protect the small. Even I," he paused and seemed to be thinking deeply, "even I can meet a barnacle goose without any thought of dinner on this occasion. And after all," he went on, flicking his terrible little forked tongue in and out as he spoke, "it may be that to eat and be eaten are the same thing in the end. My wisdom tells me that this is probably so. We are all made of the same stuff, remember, We of the jungle, you of the city. The same substance composes us. The tree overhead, the stone beneath us, the bird, the beast, the star. We're all one, all moving to the same end. Remember that when you no longer remember me. Oh, remember that when you no longer remember me, my child. But how can tree be stone? A bird is not me. Jane's not a tiger, said Michael stoutly. You think not, said the Hamadryad's hissing voice. Look, he nodded his head toward the moving mass of creatures before them. Birds and animals were now swaying together, closely encircling Mary Poppins, who was rocking lightly from side to side. Backwards and forwards went the swaying crowd, keeping time together, swinging like the pendulum of a clock. Even the trees were bending and lifting gently, and the moon seemed to be rocking in the sky, as a ship rocks on the sea. Bird and beast and stone and star, we are all one, murmured the Hamadryad, softly folding his hood about him, as he himself swayed between the children. Children and serpent, star and stone. The hissing voice grew softer. The cries of the swaying animals dwindled and became fainter. Jane and Michael, as they listened, felt themselves gently rocking too, or as if they were being rocked. Soft, faded, shaded light fell on their faces. Asleep and dreaming, both of them, said a whispering voice. Was it the voice of the Hamadryad, or their mother's voice, as she tucked them in on her usual nightly round of the nursery? Good. Was that the brown bear, gruffly speaking, or Mr. Banks? Jane and Michael, rocking and swaying, could not tell. I had such a strange dream last night, said Jane, as she sprinkled sugar over her porridge at breakfast. I dreamed we were at the zoo, and it was Mary Poppins' birthday, and instead of animals in the cages, there were human beings, and all the animals were outside. Why, that's my dream. I dreamed that too, said Michael, looking very surprised. We can't both have dreamed the same thing, said Jane. Are you sure? Do you remember the lion who curled his mane and the seal who wanted us to die for orange peel? Said Michael. Of course I do. And the babies inside the cage, and the penguin who couldn't find a rhyme, the Hamadryad. Then it couldn't have been a dream after all, said Jane emphatically. It must have been true. And if it was, she looked curiously at Mary Poppins, who was boiling the milk. Mary Poppins, she said, could Michael and I have dreamed the same dream? You and your dreams, said Mary Poppins, sniffing. Eat your porridge, please, or you will have no buttered toast. But Jane would not be put off. She had to know. Mary Poppins, she said, looking very hard at her, were you at the zoo last night? Mary Poppins' eyes popped. At the zoo, in the middle of the night? Me? A quiet, orderly person who knows that early to bed, early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise? But were you? Jane persisted. I have all I need of zoos in this nursery, thank you, said Mary Poppins uppishly. Hyenas, orangutans, all of you. Sit up straight and no more nonsense. Jane poured out her milk. Then it must have been a dream, she said, after all. But Michael was staring open-mouthed at Mary Poppins, who was now making toast at the fire. Jane, she said in a shrill whisper. Jane, look! He pointed, and Jane too saw what he was looking at. Round her waist, Mary Poppins was wearing a belt made of golden, scaly snakeskin, and on it was written in curving, snaky writing, a present from the zoo. Here they are talking to the Hamadryad. Well, that is the end of chapter 10. So next time we'll continue on with chapter 11. Thanks so much again for joining us today, and we will see you then. Bye for now.